Good morning. My name is Wesley Morgan, and I am an elder here at GBC. I have the privilege of reading the scripture to you this morning. We are in Leviticus 19, verses 1 to 6, 17, and 18. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Speak to the entire Israelite community and tell them, 'Be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Each of you is to respect his mother and father. You are to keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to worthless idols or make cast images of gods for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. When you offer a fellowship sacrifice to the Lord, sacrifice it so that you may be accepted. It is to be eaten on the day you sacrifice it, or on the next day, but what remains on the third day must be burned. Do not harbor hatred against your brother. Rebuke your neighbor directly, and you will not incur guilt because of him. Do not take revenge or bear a grudge against members of your community, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord."
Thanks, Wes. Well, good morning. It's great to be with you today. My name is Brian. I'm one of the pastors here at GBC. We are working through the third writing of the scriptures that we know as Leviticus. And one of the things that we've noticed in this book is that it's very instructive for us in our modern current moment, especially for people who call themselves followers of Jesus. And that's going to continue today by realizing a phenomenon that I experienced when I was in high school. So when I was 15 years old, which is a long time ago now, when I was 15 years old, Shrek came out. Just to date some of you, I was 15 when Shrek came out. And Shrek, the original Shrek, like the OG, was a very popular movie. Millions and millions of people watched that movie. And because of its popularity, there was a song from the soundtrack that became very popular called "I'm a Believer" by Smash Mouth. Very catchy. Then I saw her face. Dun, 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 dun. I don't know why I'm dancing, sorry. You got to dance. It's a good song. Some of you are singing the rest of it in your brain right now, right? It was a hit. And I thought at 15 years old that I was hearing this just brand new original hit song, only I wasn't. It was a cover of a song by the same name that topped the charts in 1966 by the Monkees. And I was very surprised by this, that Smash Mouth had covered it. I thought it was an original song. And what's interesting is I think a lot of times as Christians, that's what happens to us when we're reading the second portion of the scriptures called the New Testament. We'll read what Paul or Peter or even Jesus say, and we'll think, wow, that's amazing. It's an original thought by those guys, when actually it's a cover. It's a callback. One of Jesus' most famous teachings is a great example of this. It's a teaching that you don't have to have much of a church background at all to be aware of, where Jesus says this. He says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Forgive the pun, but we love that teaching in our modern moment, don't we? Love your neighbor like you love yourself. But here's the thing. Jesus didn't originally come up with that. He wasn't the first one who spoke those words. And you can see this from the context of that teaching, where Jesus has this Bible nerd approach him, and the nerd's like, "Hey, what's the greatest commandment that God has given us in the first 5 books of the Old Testament that we know as the Torah?" And Jesus has a lot of commands to pick from. Just in Leviticus alone, we've seen that. If you get into those 5 books that we also know as the law, there are 613, give or take, commands that God makes. And here's what Jesus says in response. He says, "Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your strength." This is the first and most important command, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. There you have it. When Jesus says, "Love your neighbor as yourself," as we noticed in what Wes read for us, he's quoting from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. And what's even cooler to realize is that if you look in the New Testament, Leviticus 19:18 is one of the most cited verses in all of the New Testament. It's like, imagine dozens of artists in our current day covering the same song from the 60s. And so what Jesus is telling us is that Leviticus as a whole, but particularly Leviticus 19, has something very important to teach every single one of us. And one of the things that Leviticus 19 shows us is what I want to focus on today, and that is that holiness is a vision for life. That's the biggest thing I want you to remember from our time together today. Holiness is a vision for life. Let's just re-download for a second what holiness means. Holiness is, the word holy literally means set apart. It means unique. It means to be different. And one of the biggest points of Leviticus is that God is holy. He is unique. He is set apart. And as we saw in verse 2, God says, because I am holy, my people are supposed to be holy. Supposed to live a set-apart, unique, different kind of life. And that holiness is a vision for all of life because it's universal, it's practical, and it's relational. Holiness is a vision for all of our life because it is universal, it's practical, and it's personal. Let's talk about what we mean when we say universal. The reason that holiness is a vision for life is because it's supposed to affect every single part of our lives. See, when we as Christians think about holiness, what we often do is we think about it in terms of just ethics or morals. That holiness is a set of morals that we have to live up to. In fact, if you don't have much of a church background or even no church background at all, and I asked you to take a shot at what holiness is, you'd probably come up with something similar. That holiness is about morals, and that's true in part, but it's not the fullness of truth. What Leviticus 19 is trying to show us is that holiness is something that affects every part of our lives. There is not a single part of our lives that holiness should not have some say over. And you can see this in the text. First of all, this is hard to see in English, but in Leviticus 19, the pronoun you is jumping back and forth between plural and singular. Great example of this is in verse 9. Where it says, when you harvest your fields. That's y'all. It's you plural. When y'all harvest your fields, and then it says, you should not reap to the edges. That second you is singular. It's individual. And so what that's trying to show us is that holiness is not just something communal, it's not just something societal, it's also something individual. And the opposite is true. Holiness is not just for us as individuals, it's for us as a community, it's for us as a society. You can also see its universal nature in the breadth of the commands. Look at some of what Wes read for us in verses 3 through 6. Each one of you is to respect his mother and father. You are to keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to worthless idols or make cast images of gods for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. When you offer a fellowship sacrifice to the Lord, sacrifice it so that you may be accepted. It is to be eaten on the day you sacrifice it or on the next day, but what remains on the third day must be burned. Now fast forward to verse 19. It says, you are to keep my statutes. Do not crossbreed two different kinds of your livestock, sow your fields with two kinds of seeds, or put on a garment made of two kinds of material. Those commands are just really broad and vast in the area that they cover. They cover relationships, worship, ritual, farming, even the clothes that you wear. Now, listen, you are not sinning today if your shirt is made of cotton and polyester. It's not what this means. That last law there about the clothes that you wear probably has something to do with the fact that priests in Israel had clothing made of two different fabrics, and so people aren't supposed to be walking around acting like they're priests. But what we're seeing here is the breadth of these laws, that God is saying that holiness invades every single area of our lives, including our relationships. Just look at what Leviticus 19 has to say to us. Look at verse 14. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but you are to fear your God. I am the Lord. Now look at verse 17. Do not harbor hatred against your brother. Rebuke your neighbor directly, and you will not incur guilt because of him. Verses 33 and 34. When an alien resides with you in your land, you must not oppress him. You will regard the alien who resides with you as the native born among you. You are to love him as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. This is just a sampling of the universal nature of the commands in Leviticus. What this is telling us is that not just in areas of our lives, but in all of our relationships, every relationship that you have with another human being should be influenced by holiness, no matter who that human being is, whether it's a brother or a stranger. And this is so instructive for us because what we tend to do is we tend to break our lives into different categories. Or maybe a more modern way to think about it is to think we put our lives into different folders. There's work me. There's family me. There's golf me. There's driving behind the person going 10 miles under the speed limit me. And we keep those little folders separate. And what we'll do sometimes is we'll draw boundaries between those folders. For example, I thought it would be a brilliant idea one time for me to date this girl that I worked with. I thought it was going to be magical. We'd get to spend even more time together. It was an absolute disaster. Absolute disaster. Because we would fight outside of work and then be miserable, even more miserable than normal when we were working because we were miserable with each other. Or things would be going great outside of work and then we'd work together and I'd mess up 3 of her orders for her tables and she wouldn't talk to me for 3 days. Horrible experience. And so what I said was, no more of that. Dating folder and work folder, they're not going to interact with each other anymore. I just said, no, I'm not going to date people I worked with. Some of you are sitting next to your spouse as someone who you worked with them. Great for you. Glad it worked out. I'm married to someone I never worked with, and that's probably for a good reason. We create these categories, and we separate them out. And God is saying, no. That's not how holiness works. Because what we're tempted to do is say, holiness belongs in church me folder. It's okay, holiness when it comes to church me, yep, I can see that. Family me, sure. Work me, I don't know. Vacation me, might be pushing it a little bit far. But that's the vision of Leviticus 19. Holiness is supposed to affect and influence every folder of your life and all of the relationships in there. Because if you're anything like me, the relationships with the people that you have in those folders tend to look differently from the other ones. There are jokes that you will tell your work friends that you're never going to tell to your family. You'll forgive your best friend for something in 10 seconds that you will give your spouse the silent treatment for a week if they do that. And while that might be legitimate in some senses, it shouldn't be the case when it comes to holiness. Every relationship you have in every area of your life should be universally influenced by holiness. Do you believe that? Do you believe that holiness should universally affect everything you do and every person you interact with? One easy way for you to help yourself answer that question is to ask yourself another one. If I were to follow you, not me, if someone were to follow you around for a week, would they see holiness outside of Sunday? On Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m., when the printer breaks for the 3rd time and your sanctification is being tested by a piece of office equipment, what would they see? Would they see holiness? Because if it's universal, if it's a vision for all of our lives in all ways, they should. Which is why it's really important to understand that holiness isn't just universal, it's also practical. If I were to ask you, what does holiness look like? When the printer breaks for the 3rd time at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, what does holiness look like? How would you answer me? Because it's been my experience as a Christian and as a pastor that when that question gets asked, we tend to talk about holiness in these very ethereal, meta type of terms. Well, it looks like being set apart. It looks like being perfect, when really, holiness is extremely practical. It's very ground level when you think about it, and that's how Leviticus 19 presents it. For example, holiness looks like generosity. Look with me again at verse 9, and then we're going to read into verse 10. It says, "When you reap the harvest of your land, you are not to reap to the very edge of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not strip your vineyard bare or gather its fallen grapes. Leave them for the poor and resident alien. I am the Lord your God." One of the things this passage is doing is holding up God's concern for the poor and for the immigrant. And here, God says that my concern should be expressed by the holiness of my people generously giving to them. Now notice, this is important. God doesn't say that Israelites can't own fields. They can own a field, they just can't squeeze every drop out of that field for themselves. They have to leave margins on the edges for the poor and the immigrant to come and work and harvest food for themselves. Now, a lot of us don't have fields today, but we do have budgets. And so what does holiness look like? It looks like you leaving room on the edges of your budget to be generous. A holy life is one that looks at my budget and says, I've got money set aside for me to give away to people who need it, to the ministry of my church. An unholy life says, I'm going to squeeze every penny, nickel, and dime out of my life for myself. Holiness looks like generosity. It also looks like honesty. Leviticus 19, verses 11 and 12, and then we're going to go to 35 and 36. Do not steal. Do not act deceptively or lie to one another. Do not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord. Verse 35, do not be unfair in measurements of length, weight, or volume. You are to have honest balances, honest weights, an honest dry measure, and an honest liquid measure. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. The holy life is one that tells the truth when lying would be more beneficial for you. The holy life is one that's honest. And then notice there's another commerce component here. Like the holy life is one that is honest about what I'm selling you is worth this. A holy life is one that's honest about the fact that, you know what, I'm probably not going to pay you back for this, and so you shouldn't give me the money. Holiness looks like honesty, and it looks like fairness. Listen to Leviticus chapter 19, verse 15, and then we'll go to 32. Do not act unjustly when deciding a case. Do not be partial to the poor or give preference to the rich. Judge your neighbor fairly. Verse 32, you are to rise in the presence of the elderly and honor the old. Fear your God, I am the Lord. Some of you just underlined verse 32 as your new life verse. There's better options, friend. Others of you are thinking about texting your kids Leviticus 19:32. Don't do that. That's not the point of this. The point of what's going on here is fairness. Holiness looks like not playing favorites. It looks like treating everybody the same. It looks like treating your best friend the same as someone who's a complete pain in your neck. Holiness is extremely practical. It's on the ground. It's about honesty. It's about generosity. It's about fairness. And then I think there's one thing that holiness is all about that kind of summarizes everything I've said so far, and it's in verses 17 and 18. Let's read that again. Do not harbor hatred against your brother. Rebuke your neighbor directly, and you will not incur guilt because of him. Do not take revenge or bear a grudge against members of your community, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. What does holiness look like? Love. Holiness looks like loving your neighbor as yourself. Now we need to talk about what that means, because that word love in our current moment has taken on a whole life of itself. And so I just want to stick to our passage. What holiness looks like love, which in this text looks like you refusing to harbor resentment, bitterness, and anger against someone who's wronged you. Because according to this text, it always leads to sin. It always leads to vengeance, and that vengeance is often calculated and planned out. Instead, what does love look like? Rebuke. Listen, it is an act of love for you to confront someone that has wronged you in your life. That is an act of holy love. Let me make this just really concrete for you for a second. Who's that person in your life who's wronged you and never apologized for it? Some of you had the answer before I even finished that sentence. Maybe it's a coworker who threw you under a bus in a meeting and then acted like nothing ever happened. Maybe it's a sibling who owes you money. And anytime the topic comes up or gets close to being talked about, they wiggle out of it and change the subject. Maybe it's a friend or an ex or a parent who's ghosted you. Now, here's what most of us do in that situation. We don't confront. Instead, what we do is we carry it. We replay the conversation in our minds. We think about what we would have said in response. We keep a mental ledger, and every time they make a mistake, we add interest to their account. Now, Leviticus says that that's not a neutral, harmless thing to do. It says that stewing is actually its own kind of sin. Do not harbor hatred against your brother, because it always leads to sin. It always leads to vengeance, and that might not be catastrophic vengeance. It might just be those little jabs that you take at that person, refusing to sit next to them, having a little bit of a party in your heart every time something bad happens to them. And what God offers is different. He doesn't say, pretend it didn't happen, and He doesn't say, let it fester. It's something harder than that. It's go to them, rebuke them. And even if they don't give you the apology that you thought they should, let it go. That's what it looks like to live in a holy way. Do you need to go to that person today and love them in a holy way, or this week, and love them in a holy way by confronting them for the wrong they've committed against you? That's how practical a holy life is. It looks like honesty, generosity, fairness, and a love that is willing to confront someone that's hurt us. And by the way, that's not all encompassing. There's more things just from Leviticus 19 that I could show you along these practical lines. But I think that's enough for now, because I don't know about you. But when I look at that list, just those 4 things, I've got some room to grow personally. Do you? Can you grow in this kind of holiness? Like if someone watched you for a week, would they see margins in your life to be generous, or would they see you squeezing every drop of your life out for yourself? Would they see you harboring bitterness and resentment? Would they see you treating your coworker differently than your spouse? If this is what holiness looks like on the ground in every area of our lives and all of our interactions, where can you grow and be more holy because God Himself is holy? This is why holiness is a vision for all of our lives. It's universal. It affects everything that we say, think, and do, and it's extremely practical. It's on the ground. It's down to earth in everything that we do in our lives. And so as you think about those things, it's important to remember that holiness is also relational. That holiness isn't just universal, it's not just practical, it's also relational. I want you to zero in on verses 36 and 37 with me. It says, you are to have honest balances, honest weights, an honest dry measure, and an honest liquid measure. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Keep all my statutes and all my ordinances and do them. I am the Lord. Why are the Israelites supposed to have honest balances? Go back to verse 2. Why are they supposed to be holy? Because the Lord is holy. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt. And so what this means is that these commands in Leviticus are not about utility, they're about identity. God is not giving these commands and saying, this is what makes society work well. He's saying, do this because it's who I am. And when he says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, what he's doing is he's referencing a story. He's referencing the fact that at one point, God's people, the Israelites, were living in oppressive slavery under an Egyptian pharaoh who murdered their children. And one day they cried out for help, and Yahweh responded. He raised up a deliverer named Moses who brought them out of Egypt from under that oppression and that slavery and brought them to this mountain where Leviticus is happening and established a relationship with them. And so when God says, do this because it's who I am, what we see in that story is that God lives out all of these things that holiness is. Do you realize what that means? When God says, I am holy, if holiness looks like generosity, what God is saying is, I am generous. I share stuff that is mine that I don't have to share with anyone else outside of my choosing to do so, out of my good will, and He shares that generosity with every single one of us. It means that God is honest. He's never going to lie to you. He's never going to trick you. He's not going to say one thing 1 second and do something else the next. He's not going to give you a bad deal. It means that God is completely fair. God shows no favoritism. You are not going to experience a different God than this person over here based on whatever you two are doing for God. And it means that in His holiness, He acts in love. He's the epitome of love, so much so that God refuses to harbor anger, bitterness, and resentment towards us. Instead, He rebukes us. He confronts us so that not to punish us, but so that forgiveness and reconciliation and restoration can happen between us despite our sin. Holiness is a vision for life because God is asking us to step more and more into the way that He lives at all times, in all ways, with all people. And He's given us the ability to do that by giving us a relationship with Him. Holiness, then, is based on relationship with God. You will not be able to live out the vision for life that holiness is unless you are in relationship with the God who is in and of Himself holy. Because notice the order in verse 37. Yahweh doesn't say, have honest balances and then we'll talk. He doesn't come to the Israelites and say, be holy and then maybe I'll be your God. No, He says, I am the Lord your God. Present tense. Already established. It's already happening. The relationship is already there. That order matters more than just about anything we read in Leviticus chapter 19. Every single command that God gives here is coming from a relationship that's already established, not one that's been earned. Because think about where God found the Israelites to begin with. They were slaves with nothing to offer. 40 chapters before this in Leviticus 19, God's people are making bricks for a Pharaoh that doesn't even know their names. And God, in His goodness and His mercy and His grace, rescues them out of it, establishes relationship with them, and then He says, be holy like me. So when we read this chapter, we need to hear it correctly. This is not God handing you a scorecard and saying, do good enough and maybe we'll talk. This is God saying, I have bought and established a relationship with you, and I'm giving you this as a gift to pursue as the best life that you could possibly live. Holiness is not an invitation for you to climb the ladder to God. It is an invitation into the life that you've always wanted, being given to you by a God who came down the ladder to you. And that is different from every ethic around these people in the ancient Near East, and I would suggest it's different from every ethic in our modern moment. Because in every human culture I have ever encountered, the ethic is this: behave this way in order to become acceptable. Even in our modern moment, friends, for all the talk that we have about tolerance and acceptance and you do you and you be yourself, the ethic is still the same today. Just watch all week this week. The ethic is this: behave this way and you will become acceptable. Yahweh doesn't do that. He says, you're already mine. Now let me show you what that looks like on Tuesday. Don't miss the distinction. Every ethic of our world says, behave this way to become acceptable. God says, behave this way because you are already accepted. Now, at the same time, what we have to remember is that just because holiness doesn't earn the relationship doesn't mean that holiness is optional or it's disconnected from the relationship. I want to give you a little bit of a homework assignment. It's an easy one, I promise. I want you to go home this afternoon and reread Leviticus 19. And I just want you to notice how many times that phrase, I am the Lord your God, or different variations of it show up in this one chapter alone. I count 15 in 37 verses. Go check my math this afternoon and email me if I got it wrong. What that tells you is that idea, I am the Lord your God, is not just a decoration, it's the theological engine of the entire chapter. So here's what it means, really practically. A child does not learn how to walk like his or her dad, or laugh like mom, or solve conflict like grandpa by reading a book. A child learns those things by being close enough, long enough to pick up on them. Holiness works the exact same way. It's not primarily a list of things for you to do. It's the natural overflow of actually knowing the heart of the God who is these things closely enough to reflect it. Which means every time that you choose generosity over grasping, honesty over saving your own skin, fairness over favoritism, and love over vengeance, every time you make those choices, you are choosing to deepen your relationship with God. You're not earning points, you're drawing near to the God that you're imitating. Holiness becomes a vision of your life that is a deepening of the friendship that you have of God. That's the whole shape of the Christian life. The whole shape of the Christian life is that God moves towards us with grace, and obedience is then a deepening of our communion with God. That's the Christian life. Grace moves towards us first, and then all of our obedience is simply a deepening of our communion with God. And so when we go back to Jesus, and we listen to his teaching, we realize something very important. He wasn't just quoting Leviticus 19. He lived it perfectly. He always loved his neighbor, always welcomed the stranger. He was perfect in generosity, perfect in honesty, perfect in fairness, perfect in love. He was holiness in the flesh. And because he embodied holiness and then died on a cross in our place, holiness cannot be something that we use to strive for an acceptance. It's an invitation into a life that honors the God who looks like these things. And it's at the table where we receive the bread and the cup that we remember that before God ever called us to be holy, he moved towards us in grace by taking on a body that could be broken and blood that could be shed. He became like us, rescued us first, and then called us to be like him. And so this week, This week, when you are tempted to be generous or honest or fair or loving in order to prove a point, whether that's to yourself or to God or someone else, stop and remember that you don't obey to be rescued. You obey because you already have been. Let one of these 4 areas that we've talked about this morning be your response to what God has done for you, not you buffing up your resume for Him. I would invite you to use communion as a way to do that right now. In a moment, you're going to receive the bread and the cup. And I want you to remember that the bread and the cup are not symbols of a reward that you get based on how holy you were this past week. These symbols we're about to receive are picturing the fuel that we need to live a holy life this coming week. And so take a moment to reflect on the things that we've discussed. God, we come before you today recognizing that you are holy, that you are completely set apart, completely unique. When we talk about separating our world into categories, you are in a category, you are in a folder that belongs only to yourself. The fact that any of us are sitting here right now, breathing the air that you've created, is a sign of that holiness. A sign of the generosity that is part of your character. And so we praise you for that. And we remember now in this moment the most generous act that you have ever done when you sent your Son into the world through the Spirit to die for us so that we could be redeemed. We thank you for your honesty with us, that you are willing to come to us and show us our sin, show us our lack of holiness and the need that we have for you. And Jesus, we praise you that all of us have the opportunity to partake in that love by believing in you. And so for my brothers and sisters in this moment, we remember that on the night you were betrayed, you took bread and you broke it, saying, "This is the blood, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, you took the cup and you said, "This is the blood of the new covenant, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Jesus, I pray that if there is anyone listening to this who hasn't received that gift through belief in you, I pray that you would bring them into relationship with you in this moment. Holy Spirit, would you work on their hearts? Would you open their minds to the good news of the gospel that tells them that despite their falling short, you have achieved the standard they never could, and you have taken on yourself the penalty that they deserved so that they could be with you. For my brothers and sisters, I pray that you would remind all of us that the holy life is the life we were designed for. It's the life we were meant for, and any life other than that is a shoddy example of what you have for us. I pray that you would work in our hearts, Spirit, to help us understand ways and areas that we have not considered holiness. I pray that if there are sections of our lives we have cordoned off and said, I don't need to think about holiness there, would you show us that? And would you show us what it means to be holy in that area? I pray that in the areas we're completely aware of that we're not holy, that you would convict us, that you would help us to come back to you and find the strength that we need to live the life that you've designed for us in that area. I pray that you would give us boldness and strength, that if there is someone in our lives that we talked about this morning that we have not loved in a holy way, by rebuking, by confronting them for the wrong they've committed against us. Would you give us the boldness and the grace to do that this week? And I pray that you would help us to remember that all of the holiness that we can exhibit is not a way to earn relationship with you. You've done all that could be asked in order for that relationship to be possible. Holiness is an invitation into deeper relationship with you, into deeper awareness, deeper reliance, deeper understanding. And so I pray that as we leave here this morning, you would help us to recognize that our striving for obedience is a striving for more relationship with you. And remind us that it's worth striving for that because you yourself are holy. We love you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And it's in the precious name of Jesus we pray. Amen.